You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com for all your racing merchandise needs. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAtee. Other co-host, you may have seen walking out with a great close of the big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is the one and only Scott Bowie.
Hello, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing great. And as you will see, we are also joined by a recent winner of the USF2000, our good friend of the show, Jagger Jones, who just won at Barber Motorsports Park.
Let's go. I'm pulling this out early in the show. Keep the viewers entertained, but first place, better than the last one. I got a third place, but definitely a good weekend getting the first win this past weekend at Barber Motor Speedway. First win for me in open wheel cars, first win in the USF2000 series. Super cool to get it done so early in the season. And thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming back on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first race obviously didn't really go according to plan. But the second race, I mean, it's got to feel good to, get the win. And I'm sure the first race definitely kind of dampened the mood a little bit, I would think, right?
Yeah, a little bit. But if you kind of look back on it, I'd rather be up there up front fighting for wins than and salvage a third place podium. But I'd much rather be competing for wins, and that's what we were doing all weekend. First race, for you guys that didn't see, I was qualified third, was going for the lead on the first lap in turn 5 at Barber. It's kind of a hairpin left. Leader went to block down the inside. I went to the outside. It's a very tough track to pass. I knew my opportunity was to get the lead was super short with our short races. No pit stop, so it's kind of just like a first half of a stint of an IndyCar race. And usually who gets out front a lot of times, especially at a small track like that, smaller track, just taking the straightaways into account, it can be kind of hard to pass. So I kind of really went for it on the outside, wasn't completely beside him on the outside, and the leader just ran me off the track. I mean, nothing like really you could be too upset about. I was going for it. If I was in a situation, I probably would have done the same thing. So no hard feelings really from the first day, but it definitely left put a little motivation, a little spike in me. And it was kind of funny too, because I was talking to the race director a little bit about the incident, and we kind of agreed that there wasn't really any course of action for the series to take on that move. But Sunday started third as well. Pretty much went for the same move around the outside. You would think I would have learned from the first day, but I knew I could make it work. I learned from the first day and was able to clear the leader coming out of turn 5 around the outside on the first lap. And from there, I was kind of set sail for the win. So it was super cool to get the win for the team. And I mean, they gave me such a great car this weekend, Cape Motorsports. All I had to do was really keep it on track once I got the lead. So it was awesome to get my first win in the series and just get it done early in this year. It kind of spiked the confidence for me, for the whole team. And I think now we'll plug away and get a lot more wins this year.
And
that first lap, it's just one of those deals, right? I mean, It's just in that first race is just one of those deals. Unfortunately, it dropped you back. And you had to fight back to 10th or 9th, something like that?
Yeah, I was 10th or 11th after I went off track, but we had the pace. But one, like I said before, it's a super tricky track to pass on with a lot of long sweeping corners that you really struggle arrow wise. And then I also had a bunch of bent parts from being back there going off track, either caused some of it. I had some wing damage, and I also had some left front damage. From either that or just kind of getting tangled up being back there on the first lap. Made a little bit of contact later that lap. So from either of those, just you get back there and you're kind of, there's so much going on. All the cars bunched up the first couple of laps, things happen. So not really the place you want to be. That's why qualifying is so important in these series, especially with the shorter distance races, like I was saying. So it was just cool to be able to learn from what happened Saturday and kind of put it into effect and really see the rewards Sunday.
And I mean, the win is obviously a great way to kind of go into your next race, which is a very familiar place for your family. And I'm sure, you know, it'll be a special experience for you to race her. I know in October, you know, it was definitely, obviously me and Scott were both there, and it was definitely special for you just to, you know, be testing the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but now actually racing there. You know, I'm sure, you know, being in victory lane at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway would definitely mean a lot to you.
Yeah, of course. Like you were saying, you guys are both there, and it was a very successful Chris Griffiths test. It was only my third time in the car, I believe, third time in an open wheel car ever, and to be at Indianapolis Motor Speedway was super cool, and to be on pace, pretty much fastest in most of the sessions, at a pretty competitive test was super cool as well, and it just gave a lot of confidence going into this year, and more specifically into this next week or next race weekend coming up. So I'm really looking forward to that. And like you said, the family ties, just being able to race on that track is going to be super cool. That whole experience, being with IndyCar on their Grand Prix weekend, starting off the month of May is going to be really awesome. Looking forward to it.
Oh, absolutely. And where are you in the points right now?
Right now I'm sitting third. I think I'm 8 points back out of the lead, so still pretty close. A good start for us to have a podium and a win, and I think 8th and a 9th place finish. So, I mean, great start for us. We're right there in contention with some mishaps even too, and some learning experience. So I feel like I've kind of checked some of those rookie races, rookie moves off the box. And I think from here, like I have so much more confidence, so much more knowledge going into Indianapolis and the rest of the season. I think from here is really when we start getting some momentum, really start going, winning some races, having some good solid finishes.
How does the points
you can get
sorry,
I
Scott,
think you can get into a rhythm. No, that's fine. I think you can get into a rhythm too because there's so many races coming up. So you got three races coming up at Indy, then you got a race at Raceway Park, and then not long after that, you're up in Wisconsin, and then you're in Ohio, and you can get a rhythm going.
Yeah, exactly. We had such a long break from St. Pete, being all the way back end of February, and this one being end of April or March. So we only almost had like, what is that, a month and a half, 2 months off. So it was kind of seemed really separated. So like you're saying, getting a momentum going, we're pretty much racing every other weekend till July, basically almost through the end of July with a few couple 2-week breaks in there, but that's really it. So this is really our main part of our season. So really getting started, really looking forward to that. Looking forward to, like you said, getting in a rhythm. It's true. You win one race, racing is so much about confidence. And I've noticed that throughout my career, and everything you can do to be the most confident when you show up in the track that you're going to be the one taking home the trophy. It really helps, and winning is the best way to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And I was talking to Scott about this yesterday. We didn't really know how does a point system work? Is it like, do you get points for how you finish, or how does that work?
To be completely honest, I have zero idea. I've never looked at it. I mean, at the end of the day, that's like not something I can really control. And I mean, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to look at it, especially when we get more in the season. But for me, like, one thing I've never focused on in my racing career is points. I focus on everything I can do to finish the best in every single race. So thinking about points, unless you're like a couple, you just have to beat one person maybe for a championship race or something like that. Excluding that situation, I've honestly never thought about points going into a race, during a race. I think some people do that, especially with the Road to Indy. Winning the championship is such a big deal because they basically pay for you to move up to the next ladder of the series. So it is more of a bigger deal in this type of racing. But for me, every single weekend I show up with the same expectation of winning the race, and during the race, all I think about is how can I get that next spot? What can I do to win this race? And thinking about points, I'm already thinking everything I can do to do the best I can in that race.
Sure.
And thinking about points isn't something I think that's really going to help me in a race situation. I kind of just try to do the best I can. Like I was saying, win every single race I'm in. That's the goal. I mean, I show up to the track expecting to win every race. And if I don't, like, I probably wouldn't be showing up at the race. So it's kind of just my philosophy. I understand how people do it a little differently, but like I was saying, I don't know how the points work necessarily.
When yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, it's like anything else, right? You do your job, you take care of the small things, and everything else falls into place. And like you said, you can't control what happens to a certain extent. So, you know, kind of takes back a little bit. So you grab the lead, and you know it's a good group of cars too. I mean, everybody in that front section is pretty fast, including your teammate Michael D'Orlando, Miles Rowe, obviously, Simon Sykes. I mean, it's really a strong field, especially that top 7-8 drivers are really tough. Kind of, what is your thought process, and once you take the lead, like you said, is it? I mean, is it just it's just the next corner? I mean, is that kind of what it is?
Pretty much. I think it differs definitely race by race, but in this situation, I had in my mind I was going to do whatever it took the first lap to cross this finish line first after that first lap. And for those of you guys that didn't tune in at all to the race or the broadcast or much of the racing this past weekend, it was super wet, thunder, lightning, pouring rain all morning. We were supposed to actually race at 9 a.m. They canceled the start of our race, went out with the Indy lights. The track was completely soaked, and we're up next. All the teams had a full rain setup in the car, rain tires on the car. We thought it was going to be raining almost all day. And so they pushed our race back a little bit. Indy lights went out on track for their race. Track was soaking wet, and about a couple laps into the race, sun came out. Track was completely dry by the time of our race. We kind of threw on a normal setup back to where we were, put slicks on like everyone else. So yeah, but as a driver, Indy lights were still on wet. So we were the first ones to go on the track with slicks. So you go out there the first lap with a little more concern in your mind than you had the day before, because you don't know where the wet spots are going to be, the dry spots. We went out there. I was really surprised how quickly the track drew, or I don't know the word, dried. There you go. But so there was only really one wet spot, and that was the inside of turn 5. And I saw that. I got really good heat in my tires, and I pretty much made it my goal, just like the day before, to have the lead after that first lap, just because I've watched so much video and I've of our cars, IndyCar, everyone at this track, and I knew 90% of the time whoever leads that first lap is going to win the race, and even a higher percentage chance if you don't make a mistake and you don't have a mechanical, nothing crazy happens, whoever's leading early is going to most likely win at Barber. That's just the way the track races. So I really put a lot on the line to get the lead on that first lap. Went around the outside of turn 2 and 3. The guy that was leading, I think, was a little hesitant with the track drying still, but for me, I just put it all out there. I knew it was my best chance to get the lead, and I knew if I got out front, I would win the race. And that's pretty much what happened. And once I got out front in turn 5, I went around the outside. I saw the wet spot on the inside, so I knew the outside would work, even though it didn't work the day before. And from there, I was just focusing on staying calm, hitting my marks. When my teammate was behind me, we have very similar car setups. I knew if I didn't make a mistake, he wasn't necessarily going to be able to pass me. And so I just had to focus on what I always focus on in the car, staying calm. Mostly, like, for me, it's different for every driver. I think what they do to stay calm and stay 100% focused in the race. For me, I focus a lot on like my breathing techniques, just something I practice a lot. I mean, meditating, just focusing on breathing, staying calm, keeping my heart rate down, something I practice before my races, because it's true, like, your mind operates so much better when you're at your normal breathing rate. And if you get too anxious to let adrenaline affect you too much, it's not necessarily a good thing. That's when you start making mistakes. And for me, just staying calm was super important, and basically didn't drive 100% the whole race because I didn't have to. Just stayed calm, stayed 95%, and was able to bring it home.
Here's a question for you. You're talking about meditation. Do you like listen to music or anything like that before the races?
I usually don't.
No Eminem.
I mean,
that would really.
For me, sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. That's not like a huge thing for me. For me, like I meditate during the week. It's like mental training. Like I haven't really even talked about this much before. Like it's just something I like do, and I've picked up more recently. But I've noticed like it's made a big difference in the car. If you just kind of can have that one thing, like you focus back on, that brings you back to like square one, to like your baseline. And if you think about that and it brings you back there, it's such a useful tool in the car, because so many things could happen. So many things happen out of your control. And when you get emotions involved, it's not necessarily a good thing. So if you can have something that kind of is like a reset button, it really helps. And I've noticed that a lot this year, and I've kind of practiced that, kind of been working on that, and it's worked.
Yeah. You know, something I thought of during the race, Billy Frazier has to go in and get a new front wing. He comes out, he's in front of you now. He's been pretty fast. And was that something that, I mean, when somebody's that quick, you know, in a quick car who's in front of you, I mean, and you can kind of keep that gap, and you can kind of trust that driver, and you know kind of how fast they are. Is that a good thing to have in front of you? Because then you're not just looking at bare racetrack. You're actually kind of got somebody you can kind of watch and kind of keep your eyes on.
Personally, I would say the opposite. I would say when there's nothing in front of you, it's almost easier to drive. Also, with the aero, it's not like terrible aero wash, but you definitely don't feel it's not as consistent with your car, especially if you're struggling with certain handling issues. Following someone only makes it worse. And I wasn't too, I mean, I dealt with this situation pretty well, but I wasn't like, it definitely didn't help at all. And I really didn't want to catch him. I knew he was fast. And once I realized that, I didn't really put an effort to catch him, because there's nothing really to gain from catching and passing him. The only thing, if I caught him and my teammate was able to follow me to there, now I'm struggling with the same effects that he's struggling following a car. So it kind of opens more of a window for me to make a mistake and more of a window for him to pass me. So kind of controlling the race, not really pushing to catch him, was something I was thinking about, because like I said, if I catch him and my teammate was able to stay with me and follow me, now I'm going to slow down a little bit, because I can only go as fast as he's going, unless I have the car to be able to get around him. And I didn't really think I had that, just the way my car was handling. We had a good car. I knew it wasn't going to be good if I got back in traffic. So I was kind of hoping I wouldn't catch him and kind of not really pushing to catch him. I mean, if it was a slower car, I definitely would have had to deal with passing them. But he was pretty fast. Luckily, didn't really play too much of an effect.
Yeah, he was turning fast laps of the race.
Yeah, I think he actually did go fast lap. I was like a little less than a tenth or so off of his fast lap. I think we probably could have had fast lap if I really wanted to, but I mean, for me, winning the race was by far, I mean, obviously the most important thing.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely. Will you have anything else from Scott?
Not really. I just think it's great. I mean, you know, it's been such an interesting ride from the first time you were on our show as our first guest, and you at that point, obviously, we've said it before, you weren't sure where your racing career was going, and then all of a sudden, you know, less than a year later, or just at a year later, you're winning races in USF2000 and Road to Indy, and man, just congratulations.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell my kids, like, go back and watch it from the beginning to every time I was on the podcast to like see the evolution of my life. So it's kind of funny, but Thanks for having
and
me
my
on.
hair.
And yeah, exactly. That's funny, but yeah, like you're saying, it's crazy. Just this moment from a year ago today, just it's crazy how much things change, and I'm grateful to be in this situation, be racing again. It's not the greatest feeling when your dreams to become a professional race car driver and you're sitting on the sidelines. So being back in the seat, just in general, is super cool, and to be winning is even better. So
Yeah, and I think it's I think another thing that we didn't really touch on is how strong Cape's cars were this week. I mean, 4 cars in the top 10 on Sunday. And Nikki and Jackson are really coming on strong. It looks like, and Michael Orlando's always tough. So it's definitely Cape Motorsports is really looks like they're getting on track and going to be a really really strong year for you guys.
yeah, of course. We have great cars. That's why I joined this team, because I wanted no excuse to not be winning, and my wish of that has been fulfilled up to this point. Every single test, every race we've been to, and one thing I've noticed about like the USF2000 series, the Road to Indy, the cars are so close. There's so many good teams that it's such a close, a lot more spec than the NASCAR stuff I was racing, where you're building your own chassis. There's a lot more setup and things you can do to your cars. This stuff is very spec. All the chassis are coming from the same place. A lot of the parts are all the same, just like IndyCar is these days. And it's so close. And it seems like it comes down a lot to the engineering, what setups, how you can adapt to the track, what you and your team can put together of the data you have, and what you think the track's going to do. And I really like that about the series, how close it is. Even if you don't get the setup completely right, you're right there within a tenth or two, and it comes a lot down more to driving rather than just who has the best car. So it's been fun for sure.
Well, Jagger, thank you so much for being on, and just want to thank everyone for listening and watching. If you haven't already, make sure you hit like and subscribe. That includes you, Jagger. If you haven't liked and subscribed, you better.
I will.
On YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And yeah, so our guest today obviously is Dr. Stephen Olvey, and next week we're releasing Renus VK.
Yeah, Renus had a great day on Sunday. Unfortunately, he didn't come away with the win, but he was super strong. He's fast at Indy. He's really hitting his stride. Pato's really hitting his stride. Alex Palou is right in the groove. Man, these races coming up in Indy are going to be good, whether it's the road course or if it's the oval.
Yep. Well, I hope everyone enjoys and have a great week.
Take care.
Our guest today is one of the motorsports safety pioneers. He is a former assistant medical director of Indianapolis Motor Speedway and was a CARTS director of medical affairs. He is currently the associate professor of clinical neurology and neurosurgery at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. He is also author of the book Rapid Response, also now a documentary, which details a history of his life and career in motorsports. We are joined by Dr. Stephen Olvey. Dr. Olvey, it's an absolute honor having you on. And I will say that introduction is definitely the most technical and professional sounding introduction we've ever had for any of our guests. So it's awesome to talk to you.
Well, very nice to talk to you, and glad this was working out.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you've been involved in racing for a while. Talk a little, and I've watched Rapid Response several times, which absolutely great movie. I've never read the book, but I've watched the movie. And so in the movie, they talk a little bit about how you first got interested in racing. Your first 500 was 1955, right?
Well, the first time I went to the 500-mile race, it was 1955, and that was the year that Bill Vukovich was tragically killed. And of course, he was my favorite driver at the time. I have to attribute my father in getting me really interested in motorsports, and I became quite interested when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I'd listen to Tom Carnegie on the radio broadcast of the race, the 500-mile race every year. And so I got to really like Vukovic. He'd won 2 years in a row. And the year I went, he had a horrible crash and was burned up. And I remember talking to my father. They said he was fatally injured. And I remember looking at my dad and say, "Oh, that's great. He's only injured." And my father said, "No, I'm sorry to have to tell you that he was killed."
So at that point, obviously you were interested in racing. You actually wanted to be a driver at some point, right?
Yes, I did, but that was a little later on when I got to be good friends with Pancho Carter, and I always wanted to go fast. And Pancho actually let me, and Steve Stapp was the car owner, let me drive his sprint car around Raceway Park, but they tricked me a little bit. They put a really high gear in it, so you couldn't really get the low torque and the RPMs. And I had a great time, and I thought it was good. And that led to a 3-hour talk with my father, who won that battle, and I stayed in medical school.
Yeah, I think in the end, Dad was probably the prudent one in that deal, for sure.
Well, there's no question about it, because back then, I don't know how many people know this, but back then, 1 out of 7 drivers was killed in every major sport of NASCAR, Formula One, and IndyCar. 1 out of 7 drivers. And when you think about that, that's it's unbelievable.
Well, I mean, I know that you won the race, but you have been to me, you've been one of the most important members of the motorsports community, for a very long time. And one of the questions I had, they always tell you don't want to know how the sausage is made, right? I mean, that's the old saying. When you first started working at the Speedway, and even though you knew these things, and you had already seen your favorite driver, fatally injured, were you surprised at how it was almost, I wouldn't say people didn't care, because people cared greatly, but how they weren't making the safety advancements, that could be made. Does that make sense?
No, it does actually. And the reason is they didn't have a clue what to do to make it safer. It wasn't safer in a lot of flying an airplane back then, a private plane. A lot of those guys got killed. Doctors, lawyers would buy an airplane, get a license, and crash. And it just, the whole world had no clue how to keep people safe under those kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, and it just, and you mentioned Pancho Carter, who horribly injured, feet at Phoenix, I believe, right? Isn't that where he was hurt testing in Phoenix? And and to come back and be able to race was one of the most modern miracles of medicine, really, especially for that time. I mean, people just don't know how bad he was hurt. And I think it's a thing where you have determination of the driver, but finally we had determination of medical staff who were like, no, we're not going to accept this. We're going to try to make the best of this.
Go ahead.
So what I was going to say is that, really, it seems like from your tenure on, and then when Dr. Trammell gets involved, we make leaps and bounds in not only the safety of the cars, but the safety of the drivers and the care of the drivers when they crash. And could you kind of go through, like, when you were looking at this, kind of your mindset when you started really taking and looking at these injuries and these deaths?
Well, I'll go back to Pancho's crash because that was really interesting. I got really involved with that. I was called by Pancho's wife, Carla, the afternoon that had happened. And he did have a horrific crash, and at that time was considered to be really horrible, and that there was no possible way he could ever be able to walk again, and would never drive a race car again. I mean, that was just ridiculous to even think about. And I talked to the doctor that was a good orthopedic surgeon in Phoenix, and it's hard to explain, but at that time, certain trauma centers were making rapid progress in salvaging limbs and keeping people alive under circumstances that they never would have thought just 10 or 12 years before. And I don't want to knock Phoenix, but they, at that particular hospital, were a little bit behind. And when the accident and the results of the accident were explained to me, I told Pancho's wife, I said, I want you to discharge him, get him discharged from the hospital and bring him back to Indianapolis. And she said, you gotta be kidding. I said, no, I'm dead serious. And so Pancho, of course, wanted out of there. Anything that looked good, he was gonna take advantage of. And I talked to the guy, the head of orthopedics at the Phoenix Hospital, and he told me I was nuts. And he said he's going to have to sign out against medical advice. I would never let him go anyplace to have anything to do with this. It's hopeless. And I said, well, let us be the judge of that. So Pancho got off the airplane in Indianapolis, and I have to admit that when I watched them take him off the airplane, I thought, oh boy, I may have made a big mistake. But he obviously did very well, got over it. And not only that, but he wanted to drive again. And I knew Dr. Trammell as friends at that time. And Terry fixed up a brace that he could use. What he couldn't do was he couldn't raise his foot, and he couldn't push down with his ankle to give the car the gas or step on the brake, really. But he could move his whole leg up and down at the knee. And so Terry made a device that just strapped on. And we worked with Pancho in physical therapy. Make a long story short, he went out to Raceway Park about, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks after he returned to Indianapolis, and won the feature event. And I remember I really enjoyed sending the headline back to the doctor in Phoenix, because the fellow that you thought would never race again is now winning races and has a future ahead of him. So that's the way it was back then, because things were very different depending on what institution you were in, and a lot of advances were being made.
Yeah, I've heard this story a million times. I was there that day he won. I just was so young, I don't remember it. But Pancho Carter, truly one of the greatest drivers in USAC history. And unfortunately, that crash, hampered his chances of being one of the, being the greatest driver in USAC history, because people just don't realize how great a race car driver he really was because of that unfortunate accident. But the fact that he had a career after that for, what was it? Almost 20 years after that, right? He raced for almost another 20 years.
Oh yeah. I can tell you about a really quick day at Winchester Speedway, which was one of the toughest sprint car tracks in the country. Pancho actually I think he qualified on the pole position, and he actually lapped the entire field twice and won the race, and that was unheard of. And I think that was the most spectacular sprint car race performance I had ever seen.
Yeah, he special driver, and thankfully to your diligence, he was able to keep a career, and people still got to see him race, and he got to race. So, when you look at that, and then that you see, okay, we've done that. Did you start? How did you? Because obviously you worked at the Speedway in the medical center. How did you start integrating yourself into being part of the series?
Well, that's a pretty good story, really. Let me tell how I got on the racetrack. I was Dr. Tom Hanna asked me to join him. He was there by himself every day when the cars were practicing it for Indy. And he did not go on the racetrack himself. He was a family doctor in Speedway, big race
Mom
fan.
went to him.
Loved the doctors. Loved the drivers, sorry. And he did what he could to make their life better. And he asked me to help him, to give him some time off so he could go to his office and see his patients and so on and so forth. Well, there had been no doctor anywhere in Europe or the United States that actually went on the racetrack. That had never occurred. And we took care of a couple of bad injuries at the Speedway that year. And I think we had a fatality, as I remember. And I made the statement that, it's too bad we can't do something for the drivers when they crash on the racetrack that might make it easier to keep them alive and maybe help them some, because the really bad crashes, you just kind of wrote them off back then. And that was in the late 60s, really. And so he said, well, why don't you go on the racetrack and join the funeral home Diener, who drove the ambulance at Indianapolis, was the guy from the funeral home. And the deal was that if the driver was dead at the scene, he turned right and went to the funeral home. If he was living, they would turn left and take him to Methodist Hospital and hope that he had a chance to survive. And so I said, okay, that sounded good to me, but I had no experience. And you have to realize that there were no paramedics in those days. There were no emergency rooms. There were really no ambulances like we know today. Most ambulances were funeral home vehicles that took people to the graveyard, and they put sirens on them, put oxygen in them, and a cart, a bed, so they could take people to the hospital and to a nursing home and back home again and all that kind of stuff. And so the first day that I was on was a bright sunny day, and it was really hot. And I wanted to get out of the ambulance for a while and sort of cool off and stretch my legs. So I got out of it, and as soon as I did, the buzzer went off, the yellow horn went off, and the yellow flag went out, meaning that there was a crash. And I thought, oh my God, this would be the first time I have to jump into the ambulance. And I had a momentary decision that I had to make. I was a little slow at, and that was, do I open the front door and get in with the driver, or do I open the back door of the ambulance? And in the time it took me to decide which to do, which was to open the back door, the driver was already on his way out of the pits. And so I grabbed the back door, and when we went into the first turn, I swung out, holding on to the door handle, and went out over the asphalt. And we were probably, I don't know, going 60 or 70 miles an hour by then. And then when he straightened out in a short straightaway, it flipped me back into the ambulance. And I rolled all the way back to the back of the ambulance, cut both of my elbows on the gurney that was in there. And fortunately, the incident was down in the third turn. So I got my act together, and I realized I was, bleeding from both my elbows. There wasn't anything I could do about that. But at least I got my composure a little bit. And we got down to the third turn, went into the infield, and I jumped out of the ambulance and I ran to the car that had just spun into the grass. Thank goodness. There was no collision with anything. And when I got there, lo and behold, it was Graham Hill, who was the current world driving champion in what was in Formula One, or what's now Formula One, but it was the world championship. And he was sitting there with his hands folded under his chin. And I said, "Are you okay?" Like that. And he looked up at me very calmly and looked me right in the face. And he said, "Well, I'm fine, but you look bloody awful." And I realized at the time I was bleeding on his brand new uniform for the Indy 500. And that was rather embarrassing. But that was my introduction to being in the vehicle on the racetrack to go rescue people.
So at some point, and you talk about this a little bit in the movie, so the Jim Malloy accident was kind of the moment for you where you were like, I don't know if I should do this. And obviously, I'm sure Gordon Smiley, also a absolutely terrible, horrendous accident, I'm sure was another moment. I mean, when you see something that bad, I mean, obviously it's a terrible thing to see, but also I would think it would be being in the medical profession, like it's some kind of like motivating factor, like, hey, we need to do something about this and we need to change, safety and how we go about it. I mean, would you say that's kind of the case?
That's exactly right. And that's what happened to me. I didn't want to turn around and run away from the whole thing. I felt horrible from what I saw. And I just couldn't help but think there's got to be a better way to do this. And I loved this. By then, I loved this. By Gordon Smiley's crash, I was in love with the sport of automobile racing and primarily IndyCar racing. And I had to be there and deal with that. And he was dead at the scene. And it was, a terrible situation, but I kept doing it. I had times when I think, maybe this is a waste of time or really stupid, but I think maybe we can come up with some things to make it better. And thank goodness that's what happened.
One thing I wanted to ask about, and this is obviously a lot, about 20 years ago. So Texas 2001, they had the thing with they had to cancel the race because of it was a G-forces,
Yeah.
right? And drivers were like getting dizzy. So my question is, first off, I guess what is different now to where that doesn't happen? And I guess what kind of caused it back then?
Okay, well, the reason it doesn't happen now is they've slowed the cars down.
Okay.
And that's the only difference. The situation there was the drivers didn't just get dizzy. What happened, let me step back a little bit. There were two crashes on the first practice day that nobody could explain. The drivers had no idea what happened. None of the observers saw the car have anything occur that made it lose control for some reason. And the crews went over the car. Nothing had broken on either car. And it was just strange. And I was very fortunate on Saturday. That was on Friday. On Saturday morning, one of the hospitality people that worked with one of the top race teams came into the medical center there and said, I don't know if I should tell you this, but two of the drivers, I overheard them talking on the pit wall. They said, you know, I had, I don't know why I crashed yesterday. And another driver who was driving at the time hadn't had a crash, said, well, I can't stand this place. He said, I have trouble knowing where I am on the racetrack, and I feel like I'm losing my perception. And then she said she saw them stand up, and they both sat back down because they were dizzy. And they couldn't stand up without getting, you know, kind of getting their bearings. And so that gave me a hint that we were dealing with something really screwy, because the fastest anybody had gone there before was like 200 and I don't know, 18 or 20 miles an hour. And these guys were going over 235 miles an hour. And all, you know, kind of all of a sudden. So what I did, I went to the fastest, I forget who the fastest driver was, but I went to his chief mechanic or team manager. And I said, can I see your data that you've, and they were going 237.8 miles an hour. And the G's that they were feeling were 3.5 vertical G's and 5.5 lateral G's. So I called a friend of mine who happened to be one of the people that worked with NASA and was very familiar with it. I mean, he was an expert in this kind of thing. And he said, well, human can't tolerate that. He said, unless you have a G suit on and unless you can bank your vehicle like a jet, you know, you can't fly level like a race car. He said, that's not possible to do. And so we had I'll make a long story short, we had a bunch of meetings and had the drivers give a vote on, you know, I asked them, I said, how many people felt like they couldn't really have complete control of the car, felt like you were sick, and when you got back, you had problems, and so on, so on, so on. 22 out of 24 drivers did, and the 2 that didn't had not gone that fast. And so the race was canceled. I mean, we went through all kinds of stuff trying to slow it down and make so we wouldn't have to cancel it. It cost championship auto racing teams a ton of money. It really upset the crowd. They had a sold out crowd. They had 87,000 people, and they were irate because you know, they weren't going to see a race, had to go back home and everything. And the next morning, after I got home, I got a call from an admiral from the Pentagon, and he said, "I want to thank you." And I said, "Well, what are you going to thank me for?" And he said, "Well, you uncovered something that we didn't really know about, and we've got." They were trying to make, and I think I can talk about this now because it's been enough years, it's not a secret. They were going to make gimbal engines for fighter jets so that they could fly level and not have to bank when they were turning and so on, which would be a big advantage in dog battles and so on. And they never built those. They don't have those yet because they learned from our experience that a human couldn't fly those airplanes. Now, I think probably without any humans in the plane, and they're flying like they do now in all kinds of places, they might be able to do that, but not a true fast fighter jet type thing. So that was an amazing situation that we got into. And we were just lucky that neither one of those drivers was hurt bad because they were bad crashes.
Right. So, I mean, drivers today, obviously, well, first off, how many Gs do drivers typically experience today at the fastest tracks?
I I'm going to guess because I don't know exactly, but I think they're the lateral G's are the highest, and they're like 3.5 to 4. The vertical G's aren't really that bad. They accelerate, and I'm going to guess again, and somebody will probably call in and say I'm a Looney Tune, but they were like, I think they're like 2 to 3 at the maximum.
So are there any, I don't know, long-term effects from drivers, experiencing those G's basically on a weekly basis? I mean, obviously not every week of the year, but I mean, they're experiencing those G's a lot. I mean, is there any long-term effects later on in life that can cause or affect?
Not that I know of. We have, a whole bunch of retired fighter pilots and so on, for several years. And to my knowledge, none of them have any effects from that. Now, if things go awry on a flight and they have either a problem with the airplane or a problem with their equipment and their G suits and that kind of thing, they can have acute problems. I mean, it happened right then and cause them to crash and so forth, but I don't know of any long-term effects.
A while ago we mentioned Gordon Smiley's crash, which anybody out there, if you've been a fan of IndyCar for any period of time, I'm sure people have seen those photos and that video. And what I didn't realize, and I'd seen the crash before, but what I didn't realize at the time until going back and watching and looking at still photos recently, I didn't realize how much Nelson Piquet's crash, how similar that was. And I thought that was a really interesting, that's the evolution of the cars and the safety and the things you guys had done and the manufacturers had done. Because when you look at his crash, now I'm sure you know the data from that one and all that, but I mean, it is horrifying to see how much that car impacted into the fence, and to only walk away with, and I say only, I mean, but damaged feet and legs is stunning, really. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it's no question about that, but the amount of improvements since that time, and I have to say that both in Formula One and in IndyCar, the engineers and Dr. Trammell is actually an engineer in addition to being a terrific orthopedic spine surgeon. He has been involved in this aspect of making the cars safer, and they work nonstop. I mean, they work continuously with monthly meetings to determine, they test things in the laboratory, on computer and so on. In the old days, the only way you could test anything was to wait and see till something happened and then look at the cars afterwards. Now we've got so much data in the car that we can duplicate on the computer the whole everything. I mean, there's nothing they can't duplicate. And they've got every piece of equipment and, every, whether it's electronic, whether it's movable, whether it's stable, whatever, they know what role that piece of equipment is playing. And they've been able to decrease a lot of the G loads that occur in a crash. And that includes the seating material, how the seat is placed in the car. We've almost eliminated concussion. I probably shouldn't say that because as soon as I do, somebody have a concussion this coming May. But we've stopped the rotation of the head, and it's independent of the car and rapid rotation. And so if you do that and you can stabilize the head so that it's not rotating on its own, and the body's going some another direction, and the car is going another direction, and so on, you can decrease or eliminate what causes a concussion. And a concussion, that's why people don't understand, but in football, for example, your head doesn't have to be hit to have a concussion. It just doesn't. If you get hit in the abdomen by another player, or if you're racing a car and you get hit in the abdominal area, and your head is not stabilized by the Hans device and the head surround that we now use, and it flops back and forth and it twists rapidly, you can have a horrible concussion. Dario Franchitti, when he crashed in Houston 3 or 4 years ago, his car went up in the air and it rotated 3.5 full rotations in 1.2 seconds. And nothing hit his head at all. The helmet was not touched. He was not touched. There wasn't anything wrong. When the car landed on all 4 tires on the pavement, he was unconscious, and he was unconscious for 4 or 5 minutes. And when he woke up, he was crazier than a bedbug. He didn't have any idea where he was, what he was doing, why he was there. And it was he's had other concussions when he was a kid. He and his brother used to ride motorcycles all over the place in Scotland, and would have problems, and be late getting home and that kind of thing. But it was the worst concussion that he'd ever had. And he decided to retire. He won the Formula One championship twice. He won IndyCar twice, or Indy 500 twice. And so he elected to retire because he knew that if he kept going, he'd get chronic disease like so many football players have them, and boxers, and some race drivers, and so forth. And so that's what's happening. It's just a constant attempt to make no injuries ever in any kind of crash. We're never probably going to get there, but that's what the goal is.
Let me ask you this, because concussions obviously are talked about a lot today. And when I was a kid, if you get up seeing stars, they tell you to shake it off, and and all that. And I'm sure that was that way when you're young, and nobody took concussions seriously, up until the last 25 years, it seems like. Do we ever really truly recover from a concussion?
Yes, there's a number of true concussion clinics around the world, but there's very few of them compared to how many we need. We're in a global epidemic. It's like the COVID. There's so many people that have had concussions that never got treated properly. If you treat a concussion properly, it normally takes a week to 10 days, and that's about 90% of concussions. But then there's another 5% of concussions that might take 2 months. And then there's another group that can take longer than that, and some can have lasting symptoms for the rest of a person's life. And it's a real entity, and it's sad. And I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I treat concussions and with another doctor frequently, and Dr. Trammell and I do the concussions in IndyCar when they do happen. But if you treat them until everything's gone and everything's back to normal, then you're no worse off than anybody else. But if you leave and let them go, and then they have another concussion, and then they have another, that's what happened to boxers. That's what dementia pugilistica, which is the same thing we have now with multiple concussions. but boxers have had those for years, and they'd get punch drunk. They'd be crazier than bedbugs the rest of their lives, and the rest of their lives would be ruined. And that can happen when you have repeated concussions that aren't allowed to get completely well. And I get on my soapbox a little bit here, but I want parents to understand that if your kids are playing football or they're boxing or they're doing any sports and have a concussion, you get it in soccer, there, lots of other things, using recreational equipment and so on. If you have a concussion, you need to go to a bona fide concussion clinic and have somebody that understands concussion take care of them and not release them to go back and do these things until they know that the concussion is gone. And we know how to do that. It's not expensive. It's not difficult. You don't have to have any procedures. It's a relatively easy thing to do. It doesn't require any surgery. It doesn't require any special tests. You don't even have to have an MRI or anything like that. You just take care of them until they get back to exactly normal. And that's it.
Is there a way to train any part of your body to help prevent concussions? Like if you've got a son or daughter in sports, even cheerleading or whatever, is there like certain neck training or something they can do for the muscles, or is it just something that you can't really control?
Well, the better shape you're in, the better off you are, of course. But the important thing is the helmet doesn't prevent concussion.
Right.
And the helmet is there, and that keeps you from having skull fractures and certain injuries that are, like a hemorrhage or that kind of thing that's localized. But it doesn't do anything really for concussion. But you need a good helmet for the other thing. Sure. And again, if you have a concussion in a football game, and you need to know that the people that are working, the coaches and trainers and all of the people that are involved in organized football need to understand when one of the players has had a concussion, and then get them out of the game, and that's it until they are totally back to normal. They don't let them say, "How are you feeling now?" after the the halftime. Right. It's, "I'm okay, I'm okay, coach. I can do it." Okay, get back in there, get tough. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many coaches are like that, and that's dead wrong. Because there's a second impact syndrome that can be fatal. And you need to know that the people that are involved know what they're doing.
When you look at, obviously the progression of safety is just crazy when you look at back when you started to where it is now. What areas do you think still need some improvement? And I mean, so a lot of drivers say this, like, we'll be like, "Oh, do you wish you drove in a different time because the cars are a lot safer now?" And their response always is, "Well, when I raced, that was the safest car ever. So we didn't know any different." And I'm sure 20 years from now, people will say the same thing, like, "Man, I can't believe you guys raced in 2020.
Well, it's hard to forecast that, of course, but Terry and I, Dr. Trammell and I, we don't feel that we're where we want to be. I mean, you can still have horrific crashes. Alex Zanardi's crashes, the cars were close to as good as they are now. And that was such an unbelievable crash. He had both of his legs amputated above the knee. Nobody'd ever survived that before. In our military manuals for space flight and so on, if there's a number of people, say you have 6 people on a rocket that goes up to the moon and back or whatever, and one of them, and they're all laying around the floor or the ground, and one of them's had both his legs cut off above the knee. they said to just go on by because that person's non-salvageable. Now they've changed that because we showed that you can do it if you have the right equipment, the right people, and everything goes the way it's supposed to go. But they're still working on materials. They're going to change. The most recent big change is in an IndyCar, the seats that the seat the driver sits in, the number of back fractures now is almost non-existent. And so it's just a continuous effort. Dr. Trammell's a better one to talk about that than me, but it's a nonstop effort to make the cars so they're totally safe and nobody could get hurt and go out and play and race and go as fast as you want. But there's still things to worry about.
As a medical doctor, first and foremost, when you see the drivers talking about how hot they get in today's car with this shield, and that shield, that aero screen, it's a great piece of equipment, and but you hear them all say the same thing, especially when the summer rolls around, how there's no air, how hot they are. I mean, as a medical expert, how concerning is it when you hear these guys talk about, just how much heat that they're feeling in those cars?
Well, we really have to listen to them because that's early symptoms of heat stroke and heat exhaustion, which there's a lot of sports that has come into play. And what I know they're changing devices that they're used to get adequate ventilation in there, but that's extremely important. And if you get early heat exhaustion, you get delirium. I mean, you don't think properly and your reactions aren't good, and it can even affect your vision and so on. And so that is something that we're concerned about and that has to be dealt with. But so far, I don't know of any cases, and I haven't heard from any of the guys in IndyCar that they've actually had something occur that's been scary, really scary, but they get uncomfortable. But we don't want that to get any worse. And I know it's something that's being worked on all the time with experts that know how to do this kind of thing.
Right.
You kind of mentioned Zanardi, and obviously for everybody knows, and in the book Rapid Response has these incredible photos, and it is as shocking to look at today as it was the day it happened. And coming upon the scene of that, and would you almost, I would think for myself, when you come upon that scene and you see everything that's going on, and then now knowing the outcome, was that like almost the payoff for all those years of working toward what you guys were doing with the equipment at the track, and everything that you had done? I feel like that was a culminating moment where it all come together, and this was all meant, it all fit, all the pieces fit, and this is what it was all about. Is something that horrifying.
Well, that's kind of what we feel about it now, because it was the worst crash that we'd ever had or anybody had ever seen, that wasn't supposed to end the way it did, with him to recover and so forth. But Terry and I talk about this all the time. I mean, we've been together for over 40 years, and you get into that kind of a situation, everything kind of goes away, and you only think about and do and react to what it is you need to do at that minute. And it's peaceful. I mean, if there's a blood vessel that's bleeding, you stop it. If there's something else that you can do. Somebody's getting, something's protruding into somebody's chest. You deal with that, and you don't think about anything else. It's I don't know what the best term is. You react the way you're trained to react, but it's automatic. It's you don't have to think about it a lot, and then it hits you afterwards. And all of us were dismantled a little bit after that had occurred. We couldn't believe it in the first place, and we were all overjoyed about it. And you're right, when you look back now, it was kind of the culmination of everything that has been done in trying to make motorsports safer since the days when 1 out of 7 drivers got killed every year. And that it's just gotten better and better and better as we've gone on. In the last several years, it's made some leaps and bounds because we have better with computers and computer testing and looking at all the crashes and replaying them over and over and seeing what can be done. We've been able to make faster progress, but it's the same, same kind of progress, and I think it'll continue. But Alex's crash was the epitome, really, and the most unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, it was unbelievable.
Well, you have anything else, Scott?
I don't. Dr. Olvey, I just want to tell you that as someone who's been in auto racing his entire life, someone whose dad worked on Indy cars and sprint cars and midgets, all my heroes have been racers. My brother's been a racer. Between you and Dr. Trammell and everybody you've worked with, it made people like me feel much more at ease knowing there were people like you in the world who cared. And your actions have changed people's lives and changed people's outcomes to the point where probably none of us know exactly how much. And I just want to say thank you for that.
I appreciate that. And we'll keep chipping away.